Hello and welcome to a wonderful series which is called Reflections, where we share stories that recharge and rejuvenate us. And today we have a wonderful person, Michael Westlake, with us. Michael has been practicing Raj Yoga meditation for 42 years and is a professional musician for 48 years, a classically trained pianist and self taught guitarist, bassist, and a percussionist. And he's also an experienced composer and jazz musician. Seems like he knows everything about music. Such a expertise. And the title of the story that he would be sharing with us today is Broken but Not Broken. It's a story about Michael when he was a teenager and had a motorcycle accident and how that led him into finding spirituality 7 years later. So sounds very interesting. Accident and the accident leading to spirituality somehow. So a very hearty welcome to the program, Michael. And we are eager to know what happened and what broke but didn't break and how did spirituality come into the picture. So welcome once again, and it's over to you to share your story with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Lata. Of course, these things, one can only reflect after quite some time, when you've been through a lot of processes. So I really probably, what I'm going to be talking about today is something I only would have realized many, many years after practicing meditation, probably, at least 15, 20 years afterwards, began to piece things together. And that was also born out of noticing a pattern in life where things seem to go in cycles of about, 7, 8 years. After 7 or 8 years, one could realize that there was change afoot or change had happened and I hadn't noticed, and then could reflect back and then see that the whole sequence of events had led up to that point, that they were just by stealth. And so with this motorcycle accident, that happened when I was 19. But I didn't come strongly into a spiritual lifestyle, through in Raj Yoga, the Brahma Kumaris, until, towards about 8 years later, which was in about late 1982. So between 1976 at the age of 19 to 1982, a slow cycle was happening, of which there was a dawn happening in me that I didn't realize, and a yearning that I didn't really realize until right in that last year, in about 1982, when it became very, very intense and my whole life seemed to go out of gear as I was on this hunt for this other thing, which I didn't quite know what it was. Well, I knew it involved God, but I didn't know where is that, how do I do that, etc. So my life I can now see that there was a difference between my life and the way my attitude up to that motorcycle accident and how life went after that. And I can say that up to the accident, I think that I really probably had a false sense of imperviousness or immortality. I just had a feeling that nothing would really happen to me. It only happens to other people. And perhaps too, there was a kind of, even though I had empathy for certain things, there seemed to be a disconnect. So if I saw some other suffering in the world around me, I didn't notice, or it didn't seem to affect me, or I wasn't concerned. So it's quite interesting that life suddenly altered in a microsecond. And then that was the first moment that I experienced being very close to death. Because that accident easily could have been my death, or led to some other incredible suffering. So it really was. One minute I'm riding along on a motorcycle, and then suddenly, bang, I've gone flying at 90 kilometers an hour into the side of a car, flown over the top of the car after my knee hitting the car, doing a complete spin and landing on the road, and breaking my leg and smashing my knee. And certainly nothing like that had ever happened in my life. And it was well, of course, a shocking experience. And in that moment, it was the first time I experienced of being like just being a dot. So I remember my last thought just before I hit the car, because what happened is the car just appeared in front of me, and I'd gone through an intersection in which the stop signs had been changed around the month before. So I was on automatic pilot. And my last thought before I hit the road was, what the? So it was what the bang. And then I'm suddenly in darkness. There was a moment where I was, couldn't see, and just felt like a tiny ball. Um, and I didn't know where I was. All I knew was something terrible had happened, and I didn't know what it was. And then I woke up, opened my eyes, and there I am lying on the road with a badly broken femur, with my leg, my femur at right angles, sort of with just sticking out of my trousers. And it was a strange experience because it's incredibly painful, as you can imagine. But in the state of shock, we tend to go into a kind of different consciousness. And I sort of raised myself up on my elbows, and my first thought was to find out, am I intact? Am I paraplegic? Have I lost a limb or whatever? And strangely, when I realized that it was just a broken leg and not crushed chest or paraplegia, I was actually strangely intoxicated, and then in the state of shock sort of became weirdly cheerful and was sort of joking with the ambulance staff and the police, etc., even though I was in pain. But after that, I went through a painful process of 3 months in hospital and a couple of operations, and then came out of hospital on crutches and had to start to learn to walk again. Um, and then a process happened of me, continuing my path and continuing to try and be a musician and learn to be a musician at the age of 19 with this setback. But what was significant is that for about at least 2 years, whenever I was driving through or being driven through an intersection, I was in a state of fear as I went through the intersection, fearing for my life. So suddenly I was forced to think about my mortality and immortality. So I think I'd had probably a perverted sense of immortality, in the sense that, oh, nothing will affect me. That just happens to other people. And then suddenly there was a definite feeling, this has happened to me. And I came with an inch of dying, and suffered incredible pain, etc. And at the age of 19, having to learn to exercise and walk again. So I thought, well, it does happen to me, and what else could happen to me? Will I die? So suddenly the thought of death, mortality, immortality were in the forefront of my mind, not in the background. Um, and so things continued on. I went to university, studied music, played more music, probably led, slightly hedonistic lifestyle, a sense of freedom, doing whatever I liked, for a few years. And then around about 1980, so that's a few years later, 4 years later, I'm starting to find myself investigating things, which was becoming fascinated with things like astral traveling and the occult, thinking maybe that's a doorway to this um, other world, which I'm being forced to think about. But nothing ever came of it. And in fact, there was always a sense of background feeling of don't go down that path. That doesn't quite feel right. And so then I moved to Melbourne. I'd been living in Perth up to then to study music in a tertiary institution. And suddenly, this distraction of that sort of took me away from this idea, all these thoughts I'd been having, because it was so thrilling and, continuing a, slightly hedonistic lifestyle and learning so much more about music and finding myself improving a lot as a musician and all these new possibilities. I sort of forgot about that quest. So in about a year, in 1981, I probably improved as a musician, tenfold as I experienced all these new experiences. And so in the second year of that study, a strange thing happened. It seemed like, on reflection, that it was sort of wasn't me doing, or it was coming from some different part of the self, or the outside. Suddenly, everything changed. There weren't so many people around me, even though I was still studying. I didn't seem to be want to connect with people. I started to think about other spiritual paths, meditation, astrology, and started to feel distracted. Also, at the time, I'd had a partner at the beginning of that year who suddenly wanted to move away and he wanted to move to Queensland. So suddenly I was alone for the first time in quite a while. And I think, when I think about it, the life was sort of saying to me, you need to be by yourself and think alone. And so in a weird way, I felt alone, but then I felt strangely exhilarated because I was going into this inner world, reading books on the philosophy. Even a music lecturer at the university where I was studying said, read this book from this 17th century Italian philosopher on the nature of God. And I thought, oh, okay. And then an astrology book would appear in my book. Someone would give me another one. And I was reflecting. And then at the time, in my church at the time was probably a cafe in Lygon Street in Fitzroy. A poster, I noticed a poster on the wall, and it was one of the seniors, Mahini from New York, of the Brahmakumaris. And that was the first time I'd seen anything about, a lecture or anything, an opportunity to find out about something with Eastern mysticism. And as soon as I looked at the poster, I thought, I must go to that. And I know on reflection, through my life, the self will know when something is relevant to the self because there'll be a spark in response to it. I've got to go and see that. And people who I've talked to in other, faiths or people who are not even in a faith, have always said that, there was one thing that they saw and something inside them sparked and they knew that was relevant to them. And I felt this was relevant to me, but in true style, I did nothing about it. And then a sequence of events happened so that was in 1982, where someone else, I went to a party and someone said, oh, I went to this lecture from this person from New York. And they couldn't recount anything about it. They said it was fantastic. They couldn't recount anything about it or even the name of it or where you studied it. But once again, when they said that, I thought, I've got to do that. But then a little part of me, I think, was foot dragging because it had a sense of destiny. And I thought, my life's going to change so much. I don't know if I'm ready for that or if I want to do that. And so eventually, later on in that year, after my months of foot dragging, the girlfriend who had disappeared out of my life suddenly appeared one day and said, I've been practicing Raj Yoga. And as soon as she said that, I knew, oh, I'm a marked man. This is it. Um, and in a 7-hour period, she gave me the whole course. And at that time, I knew there's no getting out of this. There's no escape. Your destiny is here. And then I started practicing it immediately. But it's quite interesting that, you know, after many years, I could recount back to that accident and realize that was the catalyst to start the process. So it really felt like the only way I could be shaken up was something very, very powerful and strong. I know other people, when they've told me their story of how they began a spiritual path, and it doesn't matter whether they were, you know, Brahma Kumaris or Christian or Buddhist or whatever, they've always recounted, you know, some sequence of events. And the style of them has always been very, very different. With some people, it's just been very gentle because they may have been actually already practicing a spiritual path, and then it just takes a shift. With me, I think I needed something very, very dramatic because uh, I relied at the time, I think, on my intellect, not just faith. I wasn't following any faith. I was too reserved to go down any path at the time, even lightly. I didn't follow the path my parents followed of Christianity. I always sat on the fence and analyzed and criticized. So I think at the time I would have called myself a agnostic, where I would just be aiming to knock everything down until something didn't fall down. And so the only way it could happen is if I fell down really and fall down hard. And so that's why I call this talk here Broken But Not Broken. Is it really felt like I needed something dramatic to break, and then that would be the thing that would put me back together again spiritually.
Wow, what a story. Uh, I was smiling as you were, sharing the story. Though, uh, I mean, I shouldn't be. It's about a
No, it's
motorcycle incident. But then, as you said, it's such a interesting sequence of events that you shared, and especially the thing about the girlfriend coming back to give you the Raj Yoga course. Who can think of that? Yeah, out of the blue, someone comes back and says, hey, you have to, you know, start looking into spirituality. I have been doing the same.
well, that's too. What was interesting was, you know, so many people have told their stories. Once again, whether it's the Brahma Kumaris or Christianity or whatever, and said, you know, it was a gentle process. We started going to a series of lectures and courses and going to the evening classes, and I can say that mine was basically a bit similar to my accident. I had to be hit over the head with a brick bat, you know, like because at the time the Raj Yoga course was called the 7-day course, which well it still is, isn't it? But it used to in those days used to be one day after the other, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. people came, and then Monday, Tuesday the next week. And mine was the 7 hour course between 1 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock in the morning, in which I said, can I go to sleep now? And then the next day basically ran or walked to the center. I thought I better go before something else hits me over the head.
Yeah. So it's like the 7 year or 8 year window was necessary for you to do the 7 days course.
That's right.
Like, such an interesting series of events.
It was
And
even interesting again, which sort of highlights the kind of mentality I had to get out of, was that when I got given this 7 hour course, I went to the center thinking, right, I've done it. I know it all. Give me my, you know, give me my badge and my shawl, whatever. And I think I was expecting that I would walk to the door, and because I knew everything, that the door of the center would open and glowing lights would shine out and there'd be angelic voices, and I would float through the door, and, they'd, light some incense, and and of course, when I went there, I knocked on the door and someone came to the door dressed in overalls. And it was actually the person, center in charge, who actually was also an electrician. And he drew me into the hallway, got out a book, and I thought, oh wow, he's going to give me, some incantation, and I will go to the nirvana or something. And he said, Tuesday? And I said, what do you mean Tuesday? It's Thursday. And he said, well, that's when you can start the course. And I went, oh. And the next thing, I found myself standing outside, very disappointed. But of course, the lesson I had to learn was, when I came Tuesday, the person started very gently with the very first lesson about the soul, saying, which is, you've got to understand this to understand the next step. And I'm thinking, yeah, 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 I know that. And but then when he put on a meditation commentary and started speaking the commentary, I suddenly had this experience I'd never had before, pretty well immediately. And that, I think that shut me up for about 2 days. I wish, I've always had to make effort, to be, careful with my thoughts, but this was like completely thoughtless. I just, it was another brickbat of silence, basically. And once I got that, I realized, oh, I get it. I have to
do
calm
you
down.
recall sharing your accident and the thoughts during the course? Like,
How do you mean? Sorry.
like when you were doing the Raj Yoga course, do you recall sharing it with your course teacher? Say, yes, I had this accident, and that is when I started, say reading about
No,
spirituality later, or people recommending books to me, and then eventually I am here. Anything
no,
of that conversation of that sort?
no, not at all, because I don't think I realized, because I was sort of, it really felt like in that few months before, when I was having a lot more solitude than I had for many, many, or at all, really, um, is that in that time, all I could think about, there's something missing. That's really it. And that was an imperative. So it really felt like when I suddenly started to have these experiences, I was I was I was in the moment. And really, I really feel, there's a direct relationship between my practices that I've developed in music and the practices I've developed in Raj Yoga, of focus, simplicity, study. It was the same, because music was the thing, is where when you're playing or practicing music, you have no choice but to be very much in the moment. And so what I was learning was to be in the moment, but not relying on something outside myself related to a role. I was I was learning to be in the moment, just with me inside my head, my own spirit. And so I had no idea at that time of how I'd arrived there or what my processes were. As I said before, it really was years later I was pieced it together. I think it's the same for everyone, isn't it? You know, with age, as each decade passes, you can reflect and see the significance of things. And sometimes, you know, events that you might have caused, you know, unhappiness or just a feeling of injustice or whatever, suddenly one begins to see, oh, I see, that was a life lesson. Thank you. You know, you can thank the drama not just when everything goes right, or perceived as right. To me, that the accident was I perceive as a right, because otherwise, how much longer would I've had to drag out that mentality in my life? I don't think I would wanted that. Uh,
So beautiful. And also this wonderful parallel that you said about music and meditation. Like, a musician like you would be actually, in the best position to say, yes, both have similarities. They're not two different things. Yeah. So
well,
soul
that's
music.
right. Yes, and and something that's it's funny, you know, like I talk about these cycles and realizing that, you know, many years afterwards, um, is also in more recent times, more and more deeply, I've realized uh, that I can't even claim strictly my learning in music to myself. Okay, there's discipline there, but I really feel like because of this thing of meditating on God as a soul is a kind of a clearing of thought, you know, a purification of thought. So I can say that yes, I mean I'd been playing as a musician for only what 5 years, 6 years before, but I really before I started practicing meditation, but I really feel like the process of meditation has cleared the way in which I refine my approach to music, you know, the intentions of it and the clarity of thought, of mind, choices, you know, my choices as to how to do, how to engage in a process is through that meditation. So I can honestly say, I thank God for what I've learned that helps me be a better musician as well as a better person. Because I think I'd much rather be a better person than, you know, a really, you know, bad person and a good musician kind of thing. It's nice to have both, right?
Where you're a wonderful soul and even wonderful musicians. And we are very happy to have heard your story. So wonderful. Thank you for chatting. It was a very beautiful sharing and a chit chat, I think. And since we have spoken about meditation quite a few times now, I think our viewers will be very interested to experience a little bit of meditation. So I can request you to speak a commentary for our viewers,
Okay,
that would be great.
pleasure.
Thank you.
I begin by sitting comfortably. Have my feet planted firmly on the floor, my arms relaxed on my lap. And I just first start to focus on my breath. And take in a slow, deep breath with the nostrils and out again. So I'll just focus on this 2 or 3 breaths. and enjoy the fact that I have the opportunity to sit quietly and peacefully for a few minutes. Any tension in my shoulders or arms, just let them sink into the feet. Continuing to take slow, deep breaths. I introduce the thought into my mind. That I am spirit, soul, seated in the center of my forehead. This is not an alien thought. As I already have the awareness that my thoughts are in the forehead. I perceive the universe and the world around me through my eyes. I look at others at their eyes through mine. A subtle difference here that I think of myself just a tiny point of light in the center of the forehead, in my eyes. Wonderful thought. Everything about me in that tiny point. Peace, happiness, love. Don't worry about other thoughts around you. Just be aware that I can have this thought. This is the essence of connecting with that divine being. In this lovely feeling of love and peace, I find it easy to think about the idea of divine being who is also a point of light, exactly like myself. something within the body. Embodiment of all qualities that I have. Love, peace, happiness. As a point of light, I can easily direct my thoughts. Divine being is a point of light. All I have to do is remember that again. Remember, I am a point of light, a soul living in the body. I can carry this with me every day. Now come back to my body, my breath, and prepare to come into action again.
Thank you so much for that beautiful commentary, and I'm sure everyone had a glimpse of a beautiful experience. So, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your insight. And I would also like to thank our viewers for joining in. And if you would like to know more, please do visit our website www.brahmakumaris.org.au. All the details of our centers, retreat centers, is available there, and all the programs that happen in all the centers is also put up there. So please feel free to visit our center, attend a program, and enjoy the experience of spirituality in your life. So thank you very much, and we will be back with another interesting episode. Take care. Om Shanti.